Now it is time for the first panel discussion session of today, the economics in an age of ethical uncertainty, nation building amid blurred morality. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator for the session 1. Assistant Professor Dr. Tobias Andres, Assistant Professor of AIT School of Management at Asian Institute of Technology, onto the stage. Is Professor Tobias Andres here? While we are waiting for our moderator, I would like to say that on this session specifically, we have Associate Professor Dr. Roman here with us on site as well, Dr. Andre, and so on and so forth. We have multiple speakers coming with us on Zoom online. So if we are all ready, could we please give a round of applause for Dr. Tobias Andres onto the stage as our moderator. Welcome. I will now hand the stage to you.
Okay, welcome and thank you so much for joining this session today. We will speak in this session about economics in the age of ethical uncertainty, nation building amid blurred morality. We have a few guests for this panel to make your time worthwhile. So I start with the panelists that will join us on Zoom. We have on Zoom Associate Professor Dr. Jörg Wiegertz. He is Professor of Global Political Economy and Development at the University of Leeds. Then we have also on Zoom Professor Dr. Christoph Stückelberger, President and Founder at globalethics.net Foundation and Professor Emeritus of Ethics at the University of Basel in Switzerland. And we have also on Zoom Mr. Thibaut Dagnoux, international consultant and member of the investment committee of Fee Trust Asia and expert for the European Commission, MBA University of Chicago. And then here on site in person, I welcome on stage Associate Professor Dr. Roman Meinhold. He is Associate Professor of Philosophy at the Mahidol University International College. Please join me on stage. And last, we have Dr. Andrei Radescu. He is International Senior Macroeconomist at the Institute of World Economy at the Romanian Academy. Please join me on stage. Get them here. Okay. I'm not sure where are our panelists now. Perhaps we can start with that one's on Zoom. We have Associate Professor Dr. Jörg Wiegertz from the University of Leeds. Perhaps we can start. All right, do we have the Zoom connections ready? Ask for the technicians.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. So let me, good afternoon, everyone.
Let me share we don't have a visual, just one moment, please.
Can we start?
Can we get it on the big screen? Oh, yes. Very nice. So, welcome. So now we have the Zoom connections, and perhaps we start with Professor Jörg Wiegertz. Welcome to our session, and welcome to the panel. Perhaps you can start with your short talk on the topic.
Okay, thank you very much. I have 10 minutes. It's exciting to be here. I prepared this last notice not last notice, sorry, I was informed long ago, but given other pressures with marking and so on, I worked on this last night and this morning. So I hope I get about 5 points across, right? I'm a researcher of the moral economy of fraud under neoliberalism or contemporary capitalism. So here I just have a slide that shows the concerns that informed the session of fraud, of corruption, the ethical uncertainty, etc., is a worldwide phenomenon. I studied this in Uganda. Here are some headlines about fraud in the malpractice in the education sector, for instance. Here in Kenya, where I'm at the moment, I'm joining you from Nairobi, there is reporting about fraud and so on in the medical sector. And of course, accusations left, right, center, and some say the accusations are wrong, etc. So it's a big social phenomena. Entire sectors are heavily impacted by it. Here, of course, graft and police recruitment, for instance. Faking in the social media space, influencer faking their profiles and their histories and their biographies. So this is a very global, pertinent, important, significant phenomenon. And I want to bring your attention to this question of what's the moral grammar underpinning these practices, right? How can we get maybe a different conceptualization inside that is not just talking about ethics and ethical uncertainty, but complements it with a few different analytical units. And here is also Blankfein, one of the corporate leaders, some years ago made this important statement, interesting for us for research, where he said, I'm doing God's work. Yeah, so I'm getting into that kind of space. What is the moral grammar, the moral agencies of the fraudsters, of the corporate criminals, of the exploiters, if you like? Yeah, so these agents and actors that you are concerned with in terms of the write-up of your session, right? So this is our topic, and my key contribution is to bring this ethical and so on discussion with another literature that goes at this from the with the heading of the moral matrix of capitalism. So I didn't see capitalism in you talk about geopolitics, but not so much about capitalism, global capitalism, local capitalism. So I want to contribute here this perspective that talks about the moral order of capitalism. Yeah, the moral matrix of capitalism. We had a special issue recently on this with Central and Eastern European case studies. I also was involved here in another special issue on the moral economies of capitalism in Africa. Okay, so and I think this can help you a lot in your discussions. And we did other special issues and edited collections on the moral economies of distribution and redistribution, again in Africa. And my original work 20 years ago, starting with a PhD, was on the moral economy of fraud and about moral economic restructuring and changes under capitalism. And we did a special issue on the moral economy of fraud under neoliberalism across the world with different country cases. And I have captured and talked about this morality debate under capitalism in blogs and so on. So I just pointed out to you. So I want to dialogue the ethics kind of frame that you have in the frame of the session with the moral economy of capitalism, moral order of capitalism, moral economy of fraud, and so on literature. That's my contribution. In a way, I want to highlight that every actor under capitalism, fraudster, exploiter, whatever, has a moral code. They all come up with certain. No one has lost the moral compass in capitalism. They all have moral compass. They all have a moral code. It's a famous line from the series The Wire. Yeah, that I studied and researched during my PhD. That pushed me further into this direction of making this argument. Everybody has a code, and therefore you need to understand the code and how the codes are changing and why you have these codes that drive your fraud and corruption and so on. And I also want to highlight another maybe new research I do, pressure in the city, because I'm also noticed in your write-up you're talking about people's material pressures and so on. So we have also new data and new conceptualization there. So I'm moving further. I have about 8 minutes left. The session task is again framed more on ethical ambiguity. I think you need to complement that with maybe some of what I'm trying to talk about in the next 8 minutes. The key thing is again to understand capitalism is a moral order with moral climate, with moral milieus, moral economies, moral grammars, and importantly moral agencies and moral subjectivities. So all actors have moral agencies and subjectivity. Everybody has a code. Everybody has a moral compass. No one has lost it. The question is, what is your moral compass? Why are you a fraudster? Why are you polluting the river and whatever, right? So, And secondly, you need to study morality, we suggest, is a group of researchers, as an empirical phenomenon, right? You can do all sorts of desk research, philosophy and ethics and so on stuff, but you have to go on the ground and do empirical work into these moral economies of capitalism. That's very important, empirical phenomenon, right? Morality can be studied in practice, in reality, in the corporate world, in the world of factories where the exploitation happens, and so on. So further, second important point is, I suggest it's more productive to talk about moral change under capitalism, not always moral decline. It's a very popular line. There's moral decline, moral decay, moral crisis. It's all downhill. But as long as humans interact, there's always more morality and so on going on until the last man standing, and you will always have moral change. So the key contribution is what you describe as moral decline. You might want to look at moral change and look for these new moralities that are emerging, that are becoming dominant. Next contribution is to think about moral restructuring. Under neoliberalism, under whatever you call it, what we have now, you always have moral restructuring, changing dominant moral norms and moral economies and so on. And that is, of course, politics-driven, reform-driven. So economic reform is also moral reform. When you do economic reform, you liberalize, etc. You will also alter in various ways down the line in a few years' time, etc. Also the moral economies of these sectors that you're liberalizing and so on. So moral restructuring as another analytical lens. Next is morals are not necessarily pro-social. You have a literature that says there's a moral philosophy and so on of war. That is, why is it justified to kill others and go to war? In the same way, you can't study capitalism fruitfully if you keep that line that morals is about being nice to each other, solidarity, reciprocity, etc. That doesn't make sense when you really want to study empirical reality of capitalism. You need to open up to the reality that morals can also prescribe that you exploit, you defraud, you harm physically, you kill, etc. others in the name of making money and saving the organization, etc. So that is also justified by literature, etc. But that was the line I established 20 years ago. I had to, because it didn't make sense to only look for morals when you think it's about being other regarding and solidaristic, etc. So that's very key. The definition I used 20 years ago, and I think it makes a lot of sense and helps, is morals as standards of interaction regarding others' welfare. That can mean a moral code can prescribe you torture, you fraud, you harm, you diminish the welfare of the other. That can still be a moral code. And it is secondly about what is acceptable, unacceptable practice. Again, that helps you to study why do you have a particular notion of acceptable practice in banking, in whatever, and how has this changed over time historically? How have your acceptable practice boundaries shifted in the last 20 years, etc., locally, nationally, regionally, right? So it's about how do you go about the welfare of others? And that, of course, is crucial in capitalism, in what you call this age of ethical uncertainty. How do you go about the welfare of others? What I'm saying is the norms can prescribe you harm others, you exploit, you deceive, you maximize your side. Norms, finally, for this slide, is about socially constituted action justification. So if you study norms under capitalism, you have to go for these action justifications. What are the action justifications, the operational norms in your corporations, in your sectors that you're concerned with, that you also want to then maybe restructure and make it what you call more enabling, more inclusive, and more peaceful, and so on. And there's a link clearly between political economy and moral economy. So there is therefore a politics of moral order under capitalism, a politics of moral restructuring of moral economies. It's very key. The key newest formulation that we have as researcher team about the moral order and matrix of capitalism is this one, right? So we are saying the conventional critic, where you always talk about amoral capitalism and decline thing, doesn't make so much sense. It's not so helpful when what you really should look into is the dynamics, the tension, the contestations, the relationships, etc., all the things that make the moral order of capitalism, right? Our argument here is that capitalism is constituted via, rather than only destructive vis-a-vis, moral norms, beliefs, rhetoric, and agencies. So again, it's not only the popular version of this is that it's only destructive. That's not true. It's constituted via particular moral beliefs, agencies, and that can be the moral agencies that, as a tycoon and so on and so forth, you have to operate in particular ways, right? And it's supporting, capitalism supports particular moral beliefs and agencies, and of course undermines others. Yeah, it will undermine competitor morals that materially, it's politically, etc., are not preferred. So therefore, if you want to really go at the moral economy or moral grammar, actually accessing capitalism, that of course has this ethical uncertainty and so on that you also talk about, you have to shift how you analyze and how you think about this, and you have to go beyond an exercise in normative ethics, and you have to go into moral political economy matters, and you have to treat this as an empirical phenomenon of economy and politics and culture and history, and you have to see all this as a productive moral order, right, that produces certain moral agencies that you need to now inquire about and think about what you want to do about this. And therefore, finally, you have to accept the empirical reality that harmful, dishonest, self-regarding practices also have a moral underpinning and therefore require investigation. Okay? There are other building blocks that capitalism, that neoliberalism creates a market society, embeds a market society that again comes with particular moral economic repercussions, that has a corporate society, corporatization of culture at heart, and brings about particular moral agencies and moral change dynamics. It's not only you don't go very far with the moral decline and crisis and all goes downhill kind of line of assumption or inquiry. I think moral change, I think, is more productive from what I've seen. And you're interested in studying moral order, economies, moral subjectivity in your particular actual existing sectors, in banking, where the tax havens, business is big, in weapons and so on, whatever you're concerned with as a society. And you're interested in moral restructuring, the rise of particular moral norms and the decline of others, the crowding out of some and the rise of others. And again, the political economy and the politics link is key here. I have 2 more slides, right? Socially norms are interesting because you want to understand this code under condition X to Y because of Z. What is that code in operational terms in particular also historical times, and why is this code changing? These operational norms, right? The key is again to study the values. What are the dominant values in capitalism? And of course, values are pro-social, pro-group, but also they are pro-self ones, self-actualization, enjoyment, etc. And you want to get a good grip on the values under capitalism. And again, this is our take on morals, right? And I think this makes a lot of sense. Standards of interaction regarding others' welfare. Therefore, there is a moral order also in the torture chamber. And of course, in the exploitation and the fraud kind of corporate offices. Okay, so we suggest moral economies of capitalism, morals not necessarily pro-social, and so on. And my final point here is that I have also some slides, and you may want to share this with participants, that talk about people and what do you need to maybe think about when you want to make your moral order more capitalist, but also when you maybe want to make it more pro-social. You might have to think about how do you go about moral judgment, moral motivation, moral character, and how do you strengthen some of these things, right? And finally, these are some books that might help you, so might help us. It's a collective discussion, of course. Moral Mazes, the world of corporate managers, long ago, 30 years ago or so. Then here's a book about money and morality in China. But these books are very rare, right? Okay. Very rare that people interview.
Dr. Wiegert, thank you very much. We need to have a little bit a look on the schedule and on the time. There are a lot interesting aspects. Thanks a lot for sharing.
Thank you. So here in Uganda, my final line, in Uganda also, there's fraud, but also now the state comes up with patriotism classes where they try to instill in young people especially a sense of ethical human being, protect the resources and don't be corrupt. So, but within the context of capitalism and highly fraudulent sectors and so on. So we call this accountability patriotism. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you a lot, Dr. Wiegert. Very interesting. For the moment, we stay with the Zoom participants. So I'd like to open for Professor Dr. Christoph Stückelberger. Perhaps we can continue with Mr. Thibault.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear. Welcome.
Thank you. So very happy to be back at this conference. I wish I could be with you in person, but my travel schedule has not allowed me to come to Bangkok this time. But anyway, I will do my best with this Zoom presentation. I don't have slides, but I'm going to give some very general comments. When we're talking about, first of all, I want to say that I can see that Singapore is always ranking number one in all the charts. I've lived in Singapore for the last 22 years, and I'm not surprised. There is trust in the system, and it's all because of rule of law. Rule of law has made it predictable for everyone, and it works very well. You might not like the law, but the law is predictable, certain, and I think that works. And that's why, as Singapore has been shining compared to the rest of the region, but I can see over the year that the region is catching up, and that's very good news. Coming back on morality, maybe some general ideas. What's a moral society? I can see 3 points. One is a society where the dignity of every person is safeguarded. It's number 2 is a society where justice is promoted, and number 3 is a society where fraternity is made possible. So this is really those are important foundations of a moral society. And as we now need to focus more on the economic side rather than philosophical, I would say that ethics is not external to economic life at all. It's part of the invisible infrastructure that allows market, institution, investment, and nation building to function. When moral boundaries become blurred, the result is not merely philosophical confusion, but higher transaction costs, weaker trust, distorted incentives, and more fragile national development. Markets do not operate on capital alone. They also depend on confidence, fairness, predictability, and trust. When people no longer know whether success comes from merit, manipulation, privilege, or regulatory arbitrage, the economy may still appear dynamic, but its moral and institutional foundations begin to weaken. And that's a very interesting point because now we are seeing changes in the economy where technology is basically at the core of everything. Everything is digitalized, everything is AI, everything is about, the technology. And I think it's very interesting to go back to the recent Pope encyclical, which basically said technology is never neutral. The insight can be extended beyond technology itself. Markets, financial instruments, investment strategies, and regulatory systems are never morally empty. They take on the character of those who design, finance, regulate, and use them. It's important to say that today's the main drivers of developments are private, often transnational. Parties that are endowed with resources and the capacity to intervene that surpass those of many governments. Technological power thus takes on an unprecedented, predominantly private aspect, which makes even more challenging to discern, govern, and direct such power toward the common good. And that's important because we can see now that governments, I see it in Europe, but I think we're seeing it more or less all over the world, are becoming, don't know what to do, how to deal with Google, with Amazon, with all the companies who are basically becoming more powerful than governments. And the problem is that what the morality of these companies, what are their prime objectives? And this is something that impacts truth and democracy because the use of digital platforms and AI systems is driving profound changes in public and political communication. Tools that could foster dialogue and participation are often used to construct distorted narratives and blur the boundaries between truth and falsehood. falsehood, mixing facts with opinions. Disinformation did not begin with AI, yet today it finds a powerful amplifier in AI. The ability to manipulate content, images, and video exposes people to biased or misleading perspectives. The problem has both cultural and moral dimensions, since the quality of public communication depends directly on social trust and in turn shapes it. I think this is a very important point. Can we trust what we read, what we see, and how it's going to shape the collective imagination? So now people are basically manipulated in a big way, and could be in a positive way, but could be also in a negative way, and that's very worrisome, especially for the younger people who don't know how to judge between, what can they trust or not. So basically, on blurred morality, increases economic uncertainty. Businesses begin to treat legal loopholes as strategic opportunities. Financial actors may prioritize short-term gains over long-term credibility. Consumers and citizens become less willing to trust institutions, contracts, and public promises. The line between innovation and harmful profit seeking becomes harder to define. In many sectors, especially finance, technology, and platform economies, innovation can create genuine value, but it can also disguise extraction, manipulation, or externalize social costs. The challenge is not to suppress entrepreneurship, but to distinguish value creation from value capture. And what I think we see now is more, unfortunately, value capture than value creation. Same thing for shadow economies that grows where formal rules lose moral legitimacy. This is a matter of space for dominance. Informal markets do not arise only from poverty or weak enforcement. They also grow when people believe formal rules are unfair, selectively enforced, or designed to benefit insiders. The shadow economy is often a symptom of broken trust between citizens, markets, and the state. Meritocracy depends on perceived fairness.
Mr. Daniel, we need to look a little bit on the time. I don't want to interrupt, but I have to remind on the time. Perhaps you can wrap up and point the most important things.
Yeah, so basically, I can wrap up and say that nation building is not only about constructing roads, ports, school, or digital system. It's also about building moral and institutional infrastructure. When people trust rules, they invest. When they trust institutions, they cooperate. When they trust fairness, they accept competition. When they trust the future, they help to build it. And the last point is, it's important to move beyond the pure metrics of development, which is more like GDP, since these metrics almost systematically neglect essential aspects of people development, like well-being. But I could go on, but maybe in the name of time, I will just stop here. Then
all right.
We can discuss the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting and a lot of additional aspects raised to consider in this context. So now we come to the people in the room here. Welcome again. Perhaps we start with Dr. Meinhold and your presentation today. Do you have slides to?
Yes, I do have slides. I sent that to the team. Can you please bring my slides on the screen? Oh yeah, great. Okay.
All right.
Okay. I have a stopwatch. 10 minutes. I've
10
been told,
minutes.
right?
Yes.
Okay, I try my best. All right. Okay. So wake up, everyone. I see a lot of people are sleeping here. I guess the lunch was very good. Nevertheless, I have some important message for you. All right. Because I'm concerned about especially two things, right? One is artificial intelligence, and the other one is the fact that we are heading towards ecological points of no return, right? This is why my talk is called, well, a lot of long title, Nations in the Age of Techno-Feudalism and the Necrocene. I will explain these terms. So can we see the next slide and the next one and the next one? Oh, I can use this one? All right. Okay, let me try. Okay, forward. Okay, all right. Okay, so the title of this conference has something to do with blurred morality, right? So that calls for, or that is kind of already a kind of diagnosis, right? And it calls for ethical unblurring. If you look into the history of philosophy and ethics, there have been a lot of strategies for unblurring, and I cannot go into details here, but for example, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant was talking about Aufklärung, right, enlightenment. So we should think by ourselves, dare to use your own understanding, right? And Aristotle, so this room here is called Socrates, right? And it's called Socrates because if you go into this room, you can see an olive tree that is 1,000 years old, right? Aristotle lived more than 2,000 years ago. And besides thinking that ethical virtues are very important, he said intellectual virtues are very important, like scientific knowledge, skill, prudence, wisdom, and deeper insight. And Socrates, the name giver of this room, he said that true understanding implies and includes morally appropriate action. So that means if you say, I know that smoking is bad, but you continue smoking, then you haven't really understood it, right? And at the moment, we are developing a godlike technology, artificial general intelligence, maybe by 2030, and we already deployed artificial intelligence with the help of some of these intellectual virtues, namely scientific knowledge and skill. But it seems that not only nations, but many people are lacking sufficient prudence, wisdom, and deeper insight, right? So we kind of know that there is some kind of digital tsunami coming, but we also lack a deep, impactful understanding of what is coming here. Another issue where we are kind of blurred in our understanding is that there are several spheres that are intertwined, and it seems that we do not really deeply understand how they are intertwined, right? So the Greeks talked about household, right? Oikos, economist, right, knows very well what I'm talking about. And so we have different households, right? The ecosystem, the economic system, and the business sphere. But sometimes people think that the triple bottom line is explaining very well how three sustainability fields are interconnected, right? But the ontological reality, the deep sustainability perspective, tells us that businesses can only exist within a society, and societies can only exist within an ecosystem, right? So many people simply don't understand that, right? And that has a lot of implications. Now, when we look at the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, they are grouped side by side, right? And digital sustainability, something I will explain later, or artificial intelligence sustainability is not even mentioned, right? But if we apply this ontological model, right, then we have to understand the economic sphere is embedded into the societal sphere, and the societal sphere is embedded in the biosphere, and the biosphere cannot survive without, and all the other spheres, they cannot survive without the biosphere, right? This is why the historian Justin McBrien was discussing these terms Anthropocene, Capitalocene, and the Necrocene, right? And he said that he came up with this term Necrocene because we are living in the age of mass distinction. We are destroying life systems. We are approaching ecological tipping points, right? And so we learned that the society, or we have to understand that the society is depending on ecosystems, but also our today's economy and their businesses, we can see we are connected, right? Probably to Switzerland, to the UK, and to France, is depending on stable information and communication technology infrastructure. But this information and communication technology infrastructure, if it needs to be sustainable, if it is stable, right, we need constant software development and constant hardware development, right? So that means digital sustainability is positive, progressive, whereas ecosystems are something like an equilibrium, right? So ecosystemic sustainability is an equilibrium, sorry, and digital sustainability is positive, progressive, right? But we need digital sustainability in order to run artificial intelligence, cryptocurrencies, and so on. But the problem is we need more and more energy, we need more and more hardware in order to accommodate the fast-paced developing software, right? So we are having a paradox here. We are dealing with a paradox. Now, on the other hand, it's very obvious that digital sustainability cannot exist without eco-environmental sustainability, right? And some of my economy colleagues, they may not be happy with this statement by Yanis Varoufakis, because he says no longer we are living in the age of capitalism, but we are kind of gradually moving back into something that could be called techno-feudalism, right? And that is so important because all these systems that we need for digital sustainability, they are run by so-called digital feudal lords, right? By a handful of people, by oligopolists who are not only controlling the information communication technology infrastructure, but as you can see in the US with Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and you know all these names, they are also showing us where the political and cultural directions are going. They are leading the opinions of modern and digital life. I still have a couple of minutes, right? So if it comes to the implications for nation building, right, there is a sovereignty and insight erosions. So nations lose the deeper understanding of the technology. They don't know what's going on, right? You can see that. And also they lose control over the platforms. Now, on the one hand, we can say, okay, technology is not deterministic, right? It doesn't tell us what we shall do with it. But on the other hand, there exists something like technological determinism. The genie doesn't go back into the bottle, as Dario Amodei, one of the founders of Anthropic, said, right? So once the technology is developed, right, you can no longer stop it. And then we have to think about this issue, right? So what is artificial intelligence sustainability, artificial general intelligence, and artificial superintelligence sustainability? Just Google published the day before yesterday, I think, a paper from AGI to ASI, right? So is it just the stable operation? Of course, we need to look at the alignment with human values and the protection of ecosystems. But there are a lot of question marks if we are going to remain in charge, right? So, conclusion. So nation states, they are further losing control and already have lost the grip on large businesses. Techno-feudalists or digital kings, whatever you want to call them, they are calling the shots. Their digital technologies cannot be stopped from development, implementation, dissemination, and of course, scaling, right? That is called technological determinism. So nation states need to get a grip on digital sustainability and AI, AGI, ASI sustainability. And nation states need to play their role in restoring the natural ecosystems. I have 1 more minute, right? Can I make use of that? Last slide. Okay, so without, and look at this room, right? Socrates, without true Socratic understanding, right? You know that smoking is bad, but you continue smoking, right? So without true understanding, prudence, wisdom, insights into what is approaching us here, we will be seriously challenged, right? Nation states will be challenged. And we have to expect, of course, the exponential improvement, acceleration of artificial intelligence capability, but we need human intellectual virtues, in particular wisdom, practical wisdom that is ruling ethical ethical domains, and philosophical wisdom. So that means insights, educational, epistemic, ontological, anthropological, and ethical implications of AGI, so that we truly understand Socratically these challenges that are approaching us. Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Quite
Thank
a
you so
marathon.
much. Very interesting. And you mentioned a lot of things. You mentioned also a few times the economists. So perhaps we like give the word to Dr. Radulescu. And you have also some slides we can put here. So,
distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here for the second year at this very important conference. After conferencing in around 50 countries in the world, I can confess that this is one of the few conferences, top conferences, where people are trying to identify solutions to the current challenges in the world economy, because we are living in a period of unprecedented challenges. But I am an optimist, so it's not the end of the world. We have to prepare or to set the agenda for the new world that is coming after the outbreak of a new global financial crisis that may happen anytime soon. So I'm going to focus on the current, let's say, landscape in the world economy, which is dominated by uncertainty, is dominated by risks, but it's also full of opportunities. And before starting my presentation, you can see the fact that the first motto, it's the word crisis in Mandarin. The first letter represents the real threat, and the second one, the opportunity. So I hereby invite you, following the very important, let's say, presentations of previous distinguished speakers, to try to focus more on identifying the opportunities in order to change the world in a better one. The second motto, it's about the current, let's say, feature of the world economy, which is uncertainty. Uncertainty has recently turned into the only one certainty. So it's unpredictable. Everything is unpredictable. We live in the world with few known unknowns and many unknown unknowns, and we are going to see in the coming slides. The third motto belongs to famous Professor Rubini, because this world is dominated by the return of geopolitics. We are in a period of new form of imperialism. It's a fierce competition for access to resources, and especially for the resources needed to implement the artificial intelligence. And these are energy and rare earths. The fifth and the the fourth and the fifth mottos are about this AI. AI is going to transform everything in the world. Our lives, companies' lives, household lives, all the flows, the way of thinking. So it's very important to try to identify the ways in order to implement this AI in a balanced way, based on morality. And as the time is limited, I just want to focus on a few, let's say, aspects in the introductory part, and afterwards there are only charts, only, very easy to understand by everybody, doesn't matter the specialization, regarding the current stance in the world economy. So you can see here the fact that we are in the period of the so-called challenging 20s, which is a little bit different, not completely, but a little bit different compared to what happened 100 years ago. After the end of the First World War, we had the period of the roaring 20s, the boom in the US economy between the end of the First World War until the 1929, when we had the outbreak of the Great Depression, the most severe economic and financial crisis in many centuries. And anytime we are living in a period of transformations, we have to go back to the roots to understand what can be transformed in a better way, what are the challenges, what are the risks, and how to identify the opportunities. Unfortunately, the current stance in the world economy is dominated by the erosion of multilateralism. And in the period of eroding multilateralism, we cannot hope for a world based on morality. So we have to hope for a shock, for a new shock in the world economy that will set the agenda for a new world based on morality. And we have to build on a new world based on principles and based on morality in order to have, let's say, benefits for the entire society, for all nations in the world economy. And now I'm going to focus on the, let's say, accumulating signals for the outbreak of a new global financial crisis. That, from my point of view, will be more severe than what happened 20 years ago with the Great Depression, with the Great Financial Crisis, but less severe than the Great Depression in the 1930s. First of all, I would like to focus on the widening gap between greedy Wall Street, and if you can check the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, we had an increase by around 90% from the end of March until now. So do you think it's sustainable for a stock market index to increase 90% in less than 3 months? This is craziness. So this is going to, we are going to see a free fall on the stock markets in the United States and in the world in the coming months. Then we have very weak sentiment in the Main Street. The consumer confidence in the United States in the month of May hit a record low level. This indicator is estimated by the University of Michigan since 1978, so almost 50 years. It never happened to have such a low level of consumer confidence in the United States. And of course, the main problem, we have to wait for a new global financial crisis because the main purpose is to reset the international monetary and financial architecture. And that will be, let's say, an opportunity for the global thinkers, for the, for the experts in all fields, because we are talking about transdisciplinarity, in order to set the agenda for a better world based on principles and morality. Probably AI, it's not only a transformative, let's say, shock in the world economy, but can also be used in order to have better education, higher convergence among nations, and overall better concentration on what are the real needs in the society. First of all, you can see on this chart, I only have 10 charts, so it's very, very easy to understand them because there are only, let's say, trends. You can see the fact that despite these challenges, despite these risks, it's not the end of the world. So last year, the uncertainty in the world economy hit a record high level, following the big, beautiful change in terms of trade policy in the United States. You can see here the red line hitting record high level, but it was not the end of the world. Actually, you can see that also the leading indicators, these are the confidence indicators for the G20. G20 contributes by around 84% to the global GDP, continued their upward trend and hit recently the highest level since the end of 2021, so before the outbreak of the crisis of the conflict in Ukraine. Second chart, and already the previous speakers mentioned, and in the previous panel mentioned about the fundamental change of trust. This can also be seen from the macro-financial point of view. You can see here skyrocketing uncertainty last year, record high level, but on the other hand, you can see that it was accompanied by a depreciation of the dollar. This never happened over the past decades. This means that the global asset managers are reassessing their trust in the US economy and their trust in the US dollar. So normally over the past decades, anytime we had an increase in uncertainty, the global asset managers increased their allocation to the US dollar because it was the perception that the safest country in the world, it's the US, and the safest asset in the world are the assets denominated in dollars. And I talked about the erosion of multilateralism. You can see here the fact that the openness degree in the world economy, it's going down. And actually, we are nowadays, in 2026, in the so-called G0 world. So back until 1989, we are talking about G2 world. We had the United States and Soviet Union. Afterwards, we are talking about the leadership of G7, the most industrialized countries in the world. Afterwards, after the great financial crisis, we had the dominance of G20. G20 doesn't represent anything important nowadays in the world economy because you remember last year at the G20 summit, the presidents of US and China didn't show up. So if you have a G20 without the representatives of the two largest economies in the world, this means that G20 role in the global economy, it's zero nowadays. The prospects in terms of growth for the rest of the decade are very weak. You can see the fact that the world economy is forecasted to increase by around 3%. It's significantly slower growth pace compared to what happened in the previous decades. Why? Because if we are living in a G0 world, dominated by a total confrontation between US and China, They have, let's say, the leadership in terms of AI. Europe, unfortunately, doesn't matter in terms of AI, as I can also prepare some slides very fast for you to show that this AI revolution is dominated by US and China, and the rest of the world actually doesn't matter in terms of AI. And this represents a shock for the world economy. It's going to have asymmetric consequences, so we are going to see divergences in terms of economic growth, divergences in terms of prosperity, divergences in terms of quality of education, and everything. Moving forward, I talked about the gap between euphoria on the Wall Street. The stock markets across the world are trading nowadays at record high levels, so it's an unprecedented greediness in terms of stock market. It's the blue line here. On the other hand, you can see the pessimism on the main street. So if you ask people what are their, let's say, expectations regarding the income in the short run, or expectations regarding the employment in the short run, you are going to see the unprecedented low level of confidence in the United States, at least, but it's also in other countries. So this gap is not sustainable and has to be adjusted in the nearby future. And the most important adjustment will come through a free fall on the stock market. I emphasize again, we are in an unprecedented battle for resources, AI resources, and the semiconductor index, Philadelphia, increased by almost 90% since the end of March until now, so in less than 3 months. This is outrageous, never happened, even during the dot-com bubble, so never happened to have an increase by almost 100% for an index in less than 3 months.
That's very interesting. You bring a lot of very good data. Maybe we
Yes,
need
and
to wrap up. We need to have a look on the time a little.
I still have a couple of slides, so I'll finish very fast, because you remember in 2007, we had a sudden stop in terms of capital markets. Actually, we had a heart attack on the US capital market, on the New York Stock Exchange, the global financial crisis, the most severe financial crisis since the Great Depression. Nowadays, we had a shock in terms of international oil markets, and everybody is talking about the fact that what has happened in Iran since the end of February represents the most important energy shock in the history of the world. And you can see here the fact that the stop of the transit through the Strait of Hormuz determined a significant increase in the price of oil. And of course, who is paying the highest invoice? The countries that have dependency on imports of oil, because they are paying, let's say, higher imports, higher prices of oil. Two more charts. You can see the upward trend in terms of gold price. This signs us new shocks in the world economy in the coming period. It may happen next month, it may happen next quarter. Who is propelling this huge demand for gold? The central banks. So actually the main driver of the demand for gold are the central bankers, and the central bankers are preparing for a new shock, because I told you we are in a period of eroding multilateralism. Each country it's on its forces. We cannot trust anymore the international institutions, we cannot trust anymore G20, or because G20 has no role anymore in the world economy. And we are going to see a change in terms of international financial architecture. Already in the United States, they are preparing the stable coins. Pay attention to this.
I think we need to finish up your talk.
Okay, I will finish because this has nothing to do with morality. The current stance in the world economy, it's a new form of imperialism, which is a battle for resources. Pay attention to the top 10 countries in the world in terms of estimated value of natural resources. From the geopolitical point of view, the year started in Venezuela. Do you remember 2 hours on 1st of January, 2026? It continued in Iran. My question for the audience, what's the next country after Venezuela and Iran? Why? Because you can see here, unprecedented skyrocketing investments in terms of AI. This is going to change the world, and hopefully it will change the world in a better one, based on morality, because with AI, everything is going to be very easily monitored, very easily controlled, and very easily, influenceable. And thank you very much. This was my...
All right, thanks a lot. That was a lot of information in a short time.
Thank you very much. Anytime my pleasure, and thank you for having me, Professor Kriensak. I much appreciate the invitation.
So I was told we have now fixed the Zoom connection with Professor Dr. Stückelberger. Maybe we can get him on the screen. Professor Stückelberger, President and founder of globalethics.net Foundation. Can we get him on the screen? All right, yes. Here I have already on the preview, now on the big screen. Wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Stückelberger.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Give me a sign.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a strange new experience. I feel like a deaf person. That means I can speak, but I cannot hear you. Unfortunately, I could see your presentations. I don't know for what technical reasons, but it's a good experience to be at least for 1 hour a deaf person and to suffer with those who cannot hear. Yes, so I'm using Zoom every day, so I don't know what was the problem. I'm here in Geneva, and what I just saw from the previous speakers about AI is really a hype here in Geneva. In 10 days, we have the AI for Good Global Summit with thousands of people coming here on AI and what is good and what is bad and what is useful and what is harmful. But my presentation will go back to a few, let's say, fundamentals. Can you see my presentation? Can you see it? Okay. Let me just... Yeah. Economics is made of ethical uncertainty. I put it under the point power-driven or values-driven nation building. And I followed with interest the former speakers. And I want to focus, maybe first briefly, my background is ethics with a focus on global ethics. I speak on all continents. I teach in China, I teach in Nigeria. I was teaching in UK and Switzerland, and I also in several conferences in Bangkok. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share with you. Globalization versus nationalism. We have this globalization period, the last 24 years, 20 plus years, since 89 to 2015, more or less. And so the question is these values of freedom, even free ride, so to say, in economy. Of course, it was not free ride, but very liberal. But with a power concentration that that the former speakers just described, a huge power concentration in tech, but also in politics, in political power, in military power, and of course, combined with the ethical pluralism, all societies are now mixed with many people from different cultures, value systems, and that leads then to these nationalism values. Security first, protectionism, we need to close our borders, we need to preserve our so-called national values or personal values, the power conservation, we need to keep our power as nation or as a company, and we need for that an ethical unity. Diversity, pluralism is too much, we cannot digest it. We divorce, we split in groups. So let us try to find ethical unity. That's the macro ethical, let's say, struggle going on right now. And I was reflecting a lot on that and came up with a third path, so to say. I call it Global Balance Towards a New World Order. You see the book here. The second edition was published in 2022. Global Lens Towards a New World Order, Ethics Matters and Motivates, a handbook. So I tried to find out how to deal with this polarization and what is the answer on combining, for example, freedom with solidarity, freedom with security, innovation with stability. So this kind of balance of values, which seem to be opposite, is needed as my answer, but that is just a small hint. Values-driven global balance of values as way to overcome polarization, because the polarization we are experiencing right now is really a bit dangerous, as we all know, and what the other speakers already emphasized. Now, nation building by economic, military, I add economic, military power and or values. To make it simple, there are three main world lenses, so to say, glasses. My power first. I don't care about values. I don't care about multilateral norms and treaties. My power first is the goal, and on ever costs, whatever it costs. I think we all know that this is a very dangerous but also realistic scenario right now. Some powers are saying my power first, all the rest is secondary. The second worldview is my money first. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a trillionaire, I have a network of companies, but at the end of the day, my money first. And of course, we all know that money and power are linked. We cannot have power without money, or many think at least. And we could, and as soon as we have money, we have political power, we have military power, we have cultural power. If we look at what other speakers also said about influence now of social media, so wherever we have power to buy another company, we just read today that the trillionaire now bought also another company. So with $1 trillion, you can buy a lot of things, including political powers. I'm often in Africa, and I just came back from the copper belt and cobalt belt. 80% of the cobalt worldwide comes from DRC, and 80% of these 80% are in the hands of Chinese companies. I was there, and imagine what kind of power concentration that means. Every mobile phone is dependent on Chinese cobalt from DRC. And we see now the power shift in African countries, where African countries say now it's our turn. We want to have not only the export of our raw materials, we want to have a say in processing and all the rest. So it's not only an oil issue, it's a rare metals issue, which is there. But now the third lens and the rare metals issue and power struggle is a power money struggle. So the first two worldviews. Now, my approach would be our common values first. As humanity, to survive and to avoid extinction, as a former speaker said, I'm not so pessimistic about extinction, but what can we have to defend our common values, our common interests as humanity? And we have to fight on that. Now, if you look at values, there is an interesting world values survey since about 20 years, and there are value shifts. These are standardized based on thousands of data on in the different cultures worldwide. And we see on the left side the World Values Survey 2012 to 2017, and then the new one 2017 to 2022, and the new one 22 to 27 is in process. And you see, without going to details, there are shifts in that. On the vertical, on the horizontal, you see self-expression values. So Protestant Europe is very much individualistic. My self-impression is important. And then on the other hand, you have on the left side African Islamic traditional value, where community values are more important. And then on the horizontal, on the vertical line, you have traditional versus secular values. So religious, non-religious, and then all the countries in between, the Catholic Europe, the Latin American, the Orthodox Europe. We just heard from the Romanian colleague, the Confucian Chinese. So you see, for example, the Confucian worldview is getting more secular, or is already secular, but turns to more also self-expression. So the individualistic part is growing if you compare the brown part on top of the graph on the left side and the right side. So you see, we have value developments, and of course these are not shifts within a day, these are shifts over years, but we can show that there are shifts. Now, we need to remind national values, and I will say why. And we did a very interesting study based on a conference in Hanoi in Vietnam 2-3 years back. We published with a Vietnamese scholar from VAS, the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences in Hanoi, National Values in Vietnam and the World. And you can download it for free. You have the link downstairs, globeethics.net/publications. It's an interesting comparison, and what I presented there is I compared about 8 countries. And what did I do? I compared the preambles of the constitutions, because these are stable formulations. And of course, these are goals. We know that preambles are not fully implemented, but they are still legally binding basis of constitutions. And if you look at that, you see basic values: independence, sovereignty, unity, democracy, justice, civilization, development, equality, and so on. And that means, even if we think we are in a world where all values are now breaking down and shifting, we still have this, and every parliament is bound to its constitution. So that is a way we can show that values are existing and can be referred to. So I'm not saying that everything goes down and will collapse. We have frameworks we can refer to, and we have to refer to the politics, academics, religious organizations, have to refer to these kind of values that exist. And the other one is the human rights principles. And I could add the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which were mentioned by other speakers already, is a framework of global values. And as long as the international community and the Assembly of the UN does not say, let's forget about the SDGs are still a globally agreed framework of values, and then even implemented or transferred into 100 plus concrete objectives. So we can refer to that and not say everything is going down. But of course, the big challenge is that we have goals, we have preambles in constitution, we have SDGs, we have the Human Rights Charter, but the reality is far from that. But we have this frame. And if you look at the human rights principles, Human rights are universal and inalienable. That means every human being can refer to it. It's indivisible. We cannot say we are for voting rights, but we are against the right to food and water. The social, economic, cultural rights and the political rights are connected, are indivisible. Interdependent and interrelated is self-explaining. And this is based now on equality, non-discrimination, participation, inclusion, accountability, and rule of law. These are very clear benchmarks of these human rights principles. So just now, this week, we have here in Geneva the Human Rights Council and meeting. So even with all the crises of the UN that you all know, but it's still working. We should not forget the Human Rights Council is serious, is working. I have the badge to participate. So there is a framework. And that leads me now to the question of point 3, commit business and economy to these national and global values. The economy is and business is not a free ride. They are embedded in a global network or global framework of values. Is it UN values of human rights? Is it national values in the constitutions? And governments and multilateral institutions have to remind them. And we can also say positively, many companies embed these values in their business. The ESG, environmental, social, and governance principles are binding principles for companies working in the European Union and from the European countries to the world. If we look at Africa, for example, European companies are obliged now in detail and can be fined if they don't follow the ESG principles in their value chain with Africa, with Asia, and so on. So private and public sector business have to be obliged to respect and promote global values. And how? By market incentives for more ethical companies. They should get a higher price for, and we have these mechanisms. I work a lot on labels of products. By ESG norms from governments, by binding UN and continental treaties, by media surveillance. Free media play an important role to monitor not only parliaments and other media, but also business. By calls of religious organizations to their members in private and public sector. If a religious leader, is it a Buddhist leader or a Catholic Pope or a Protestant leader or an Islamic leader, they have to remind their business members and their politicians in their midst of these values. And then finally, last but not least, by courts and sanctions. Courts have to play a role in that, and they do, but they also, unfortunately, I work since 30 years on anti-corruption issues, and we know that courts, unfortunately, are also in many countries up and do not follow or defend the values as they should. So these are a few, and I come back to the opening, objective global ends of universal and contextual values in all the sectors. I have sectors on sustainability, on education, on media, on governance, or on political parties, and so on. So this is available for you. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Stückelberger. That was a very interesting session. We ran a little bit behind schedule. I'm sorry for that. So we won't have the opportunity for many Q&A, but two of the speakers are still here. So feel free to reach out after the session for networking. Also the same for the panelists on Zoom. They are still available. Thank you so much for the session. Thank you for being here in person. Very much appreciated.